Okay. Coming to the first one, we'll have the first one. Now, this is basically, these are rather terrible portraits. So they actually come from all sorts of.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Okay.
Okay. Now, on the first one, the profile, that's Brunelleschi. Now, I'm going to give you his dates because he's roughly 8 to 10 years older than Donatello. He was born in 1377 and he died in 1446. On the next one, it's Donatello. His original name was Donato de Bardi, and he was born in 1386, you see, 9 years later. He died in 1466. They both lived relatively old ages. Now, the next one, who is the most important painter, and this is Tommaso di Simona. This is Masaccio, the third one, that's Masaccio. Now, poor Masaccio was only 27 when he died. He was born in 1401 and he died in 1428. Now, the final one on the left, on the complete right, that's Leon Battista Alberti. Now, Alberti was everything. I mean, he was a writer, he was an architect, and he was a sculptor. This is a self-portrait. I mean, he's obviously based on Roman background, but that's his self-portrait. And he was born in 1404. He was younger than the others, and he died in 1472. Now, these are the people, these three men are the people who really developed single-eye perspectival space and began to show images that we now see as contemporary. Okay, let's have the next one. Now, this is in the exhibition. It's an interesting, slightly later contemporary view of Florence. It's probably late 15th century. I say it's late 15th century because you see right in the center here is the Duomo, and it's got the dome on. Now, what we're first of all going to be talking about is it without the dome. But here is Florence, and it was done by a man they think called Rosselli, and he died in 1512. He was born in 1448. But this particular one is possibly what Florence looked like at the time. It was a relatively small town. I think there was something like 30,000 people in it. It wasn't very big. Okay, next. Now, what happened? This particular one is very important because Brunelleschi and Donatello were both goldsmiths. Probably for 7 or 8 years, they've trained as goldsmiths. Donatello called himself a goldsmith and a carver, but they were actually in the guild of goldsmiths. So both of them were. They probably met in Pisa. They're not quite sure where they met, but they knew each other. The most important thing is they went to Rome as young men, very young men. They went to Rome. They were the first people to go to Rome to examine the remains, the Roman remains. And they spent, it's according to later on to what Vasari says, they spent their time digging up bits and pieces and trying to find out as much as they possibly could. Now, there's no doubt about it that Brunelleschi spent all of his time looking at the Pantheon, because the Pantheon, of course, had this big dome, and we're looking at the top. The top picture is the Pantheon, and that was actually built in 120 to 128 AD under the Emperor Hadrian. And right at the bottom of it's the drawing of the dome here. It's an elevation of it. Right next to it in the center, I put this on because this is the kind of thing that Donatello was particularly interested in. And this is carvings from the Arch of Constantine. And this is 315 BC. So you see, we've got all these things for the first time being seen. And most important, the Roman figure of a male. Now, what we're looking at is, for the first time, they began to understand, Donatello began to understand contrapposto. Now you see this man is really standing on one, leaning on one foot with a bent knee, and that makes a slight S shape. And this particular one, yeah, I don't know whether it was this one that he saw, but he certainly saw Roman sculpture at this point. And this is based, of course, on the Greeks. And they think it's Marcellus as Hermes. They think it's 20 BC, but basically it is not. It is really to show you the general kind of figure that Donatello saw for the first time. Now they came back to Florence, and the next one we're going to see is when now these two figures. Now these are very interesting because on the left is Donatello, and in the middle is Brunelleschi. Now Donatello, this is wooden, the wooden Christ, and it was done in 1408. Now, the interesting thing that I didn't tell them on Tuesday because I forgot was in the Donatello, these arms are movable. So, in other words, it can be brought down from the cross, and it was obviously used in those kind of processions, usually sort of on Good Friday when they processed the figure. Now, the interesting thing is that Donatello at the time said Brunelleschi at the time said of Donatello as well that he made Christ look like a peasant. And the answer, according to, again, Vasari, Donna said, okay, make one yourself, which in fact he did. And this is Brunelleschi's. So this is 1408, and this is 1410 to 15. Now, I can't quite see it, but all the art historians point out that the Brunelleschi is much more classical, whereas the Donatello is much more human. Now, on the right, you see the heads of both of them. The top is Donatello, and the bottom one is Brunelleschi. Now, this particular one was for the Duomo, but this one here was for Santa Maria Novella, and they were both painted wood. And actually, at the time, Brunelleschi would have identified himself as I say, as a silversmith. He was actually made into the sort of the union thing pretty early, in the sort of the late something like 1386. Okay, next one. Now here we have the very, very first contrapposto Donatello. Now this particular one on the left here is in the exhibition, and this photograph was taken by Camilla. Now, I want to point out is that all sorts of important things about this figure. As I say, it's contrapposto. Underneath the drapery, you can see a perfectly normal figure. Everything is perfectly well, but the important thing is it's meant to be seen from below. So we are looking up towards it. This particular one was really, really quite remarkable. It was the David, and it was 1408. It was for the Duomo. And this particular one in the center was the one that made his reputation. And this is a St. George. This is 1415 to 17. Now, the important thing about this particular sculpture is on the right, it was commissioned by the group of the Guild of Orsan Michele. Now, for the first time, you've got a group of craftspeople, the guilds, creating their own church. Originally, it was a sort of an open sort of marketplace. In fact, it was not sort of put together. It started in the late 14th century, but it was actually created by the guilds. Now, the important thing about this is that the guilds themselves commissioned, each guild commissioned itself its niche statue on the outside. And in this particular case, we've got Donatello's, which was considered the most important. And this particular one was commissioned by the Armourers Guild, and it is St. George. And again, the complete figure, again, note the sort of the contrapposto figure. But the most important thing is the predella underneath it, this piece here, this one here.
The frieze.
The frieze at the bottom. And this is the most important because it's the very, very first time we see in sculpture, we see single eye perspectival space. Can you see?
You can sort of
So
see
you
it
really
here.
see, can you see at the background
The
here?
arcade.
Arcade at the background.
And then the cave.
Here the
The cave opening is
and of
also
course the St. George and the dragon and the princess is best Greek. Now, sadly, when the St. George was taken out, what there is now is a copy of it. It's now in the Bargello. They didn't remove the predella here, this piece here, and so this has suffered by wind and God knows what because it stayed there. But this is a tremendously important this niche here. So in 1415 we are seeing for the first time in sculpture single eye perspective. Okay, next one. Now, this is the Masaccio. This is the first time we see, again, perspectival space in painting. And this is, of course, the tribute money. It's the Brancusi niche. The Brancusi. And this was actually commissioned by a man called Felix Brancusi, who was in fact a wool, a cloth merchant. It was left unfinished because, of course, Masaccio died very young. But what we're looking at now, you see, is a group of people discussing. In fact, it's John. The chapel is devoted to St. John, and it's St. John. But most important, of course, is the way that the architecture and the landscape are seen together, and you see the figures in the landscape perfectly well. Now, this particular one is of course in Florence, and is not in the exhibition. But the next one is, and this is very, very interesting. This is again Masaccio, and this is the Adoration of the Magi. And it's again, look at the figures and you see, and I'll show you the next one because this is incidentally in the exhibition, and this again is Camilla's example, her photograph. And this came from Pisa. He and Donatello and Brunelleschi were working in Pisa at this time. And the next one is a detail, particularly shown to show you the kind of sculptural figures. And can you see how you see the idea of perspectival space, because suddenly you see figures on the background here and the little figure here, and look at the horses and the shape of and so on. It's actually extraordinarily beautiful. And it was as I say, it was in the Santo Carmine in Pisa. And as I say, Donatello was working at the same time as Masaccio at this particular point. Okay, next one, both working in Pisa. But perhaps the figure that is who they were all working for was in fact, of course, the doors. I can't suddenly see it. It's extraordinary. I can't.
What?
The name of the. I'm going.
No, no, no. Tell me what's going on. The
I
name
can't.
of,
The sculptor.
isn't it Giotto?
No,
No, it's not. It's
I'm going.
No, no, no. Hold on, hold on.
It's
hold on.
Ghiberti. Of course.
Ghiberti.
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 I'm so sorry, loves. I've had a sudden moment of terrible. Now, these were the doors for the baptistry, which is part of the Duomo. I'll show you in a moment. Well, I should have shown you at the beginning. Perhaps I'll show you in a minute that the Duomo, in fact, is comprised. The Florence Cathedral
Mhm.
is comprised of three different
Buildings. Yes.
One is the baptistry. One is the
cathedral itself.
The cathedral where they do, and the third one, of course, is where the.
Do you have that written down somewhere?
No, darling. I mean, this is ridiculous. I'm so sorry.
It's just because we haven't been to Florence in a very long time, so we can feign memory
No,
loss.
this is not. This is ridiculous. This is where the canton, what's it called? Where the bell comes from. The bells. Oh God. Canton.
Bell tower?
The bell tower. It is the bell tower. But the point about it is that this particular series, the doors were.
Yes, it's the Campanile.
Campanile. That's
Yes.
it. The doors were actually commissioned by the church, of course, and it was a big competition. And Brunelleschi came second, and Ghiberti won. Now, this particular set of doors took him 20 years. And what we're looking at here is the first set. And here's a detail here, which is the sacrifice of Isaac here. And on the extreme right is the self-portrait. Actually, that's the second set of doors, which took another 20 years. And that so this is a self-portrait, but it's a later self-portrait. Now, the important thing about the Ghiberti doors was the fact that all of them were working. They were a huge, relatively huge set of people who actually to construct these sculptural doors, and everybody was working. Brunelleschi, Donatello, and painters too. I mean, Uccello was one of the people who was actually working. In the 40 years, virtually everybody who came through Florence, who was an artist, was at some point part of this great studio, which was run by Ghiberti. Okay, next one. And this is now we see what Donatello is doing. This is the very, very, very first and very important marble he made of St. John the Evangelist. And this is 1408 to 15. Now, this is a completely different figure from any figure before. In the first place, he's taking into account the people who are going to be looking at it. Now, you've got to, again, imagine you're looking upwards towards this huge figure. Now, you see how strong the figure is, and the size of the hands, which incidentally are always so very, very big. But most importantly, again, you get the sense this is a real human being. This is based, and interestingly, for the first time, he was working from figure. I mean, he was working from life. He would have had a model for this particular one. Now, the figure in the center was again a first. This is the first time he ever did a bronze figure. And this is St. Louis of Toulouse. Now, this particular figure was extremely difficult to do because it's enormous. Again, it's in a niche. Again, if you see, it really gives you the sense that she's standing in the niche. And it was 1422, but it's made of very, very many different parts of the bronze sculpture. It was not made in one piece. It was far too big for this. And it really is quite extraordinary. And you can see from the detail here, the kind of, again, the really human sense of the figure. Now, the next thing I'm going to move over to Camilla, next one, because this, of course, is the dome. And Brunelleschi, by this time, has decided, he was always interested in architecture, and he's done the Foundling Hospital, and he again, there were competitions, and he made the competition for making the dome. And now we're talking about starts in 1420, and it finishes in 1436. And here you can see the three parts of the Duomo from here. Okay, next, you can go on, Camilla. Sadly.
Okay, so the thing to remember, to keep in mind is, well, as Pat just mentioned, Brunelleschi was not an architect, but he did have I think what really won him the commission was his out of the box thinking with regards to how to construct the dome. So the brief was that you had to have a dome without any sort of support, any visible form of support. It does obviously have support, but it doesn't have any visible forms of support like a flying buttress will. And so, as we all know, flying buttresses, let's think of the Notre Dame Cathedral, which has visible flying buttresses that support the nave and then also bring down from the dome there to kind of bring the stresses. If you see here, the load bearing would be bearing down here and then following down into whatever buttress. However, here, what Brunelleschi did was, in eliminating the buttresses, the flying buttresses that would be connected to the base of the dome, he basically sets up a bi sort of phasic system, a two-phase system, which is where he has, and Pat's lovingly put this sort of axonometric cross section here, which is amazing. I wish I could draw that, where you have one sort of dome inside a second dome. So
this bit,
yeah, so my pointer has hit the dust, so I'm going to use the mouse. So here, so essentially what this is constructed with is the octagonal dome in the middle, which you can see from inside, is constructed with what's called like a sort of chain of wood. So here, these chains of wood here all circle the dome and take the loads down from the oculus up here down to the base. And then you have what, amazingly, because you are able to go in, I've actually done that. You are actually able to go in, and this is an occupiable space between these two. They're called, well, yes, they're actually called calottes, taken after the cap that the religious figures in the church wear. So you have one calotte here, and then you have the one calotte in the middle, and these are the two domes. So essentially, through this sort of different materials, he had a chain of wood and then steel, like iron chains as well. You essentially have this outer dome, which sort of almost cradles the inner dome. Not quite hanging, but using something like that, where then you have between these two, you have all of the load being then pushed down into this sort of bottom layer, these are the tambours here, which are obviously sort of like large oculi on the sides.
Now, what they actually say in all the art history things, they say in this particular, apart from the fact it's the very first one since the Pantheon, and he spent all his time when he was in Rome looking and writing about the Pantheon, but they say he invented a hoisting machine
exactly
in order to get the bricks up. This was amazing.
It was an ox-driven sort of machine, basically, where he also devised it in such a way that because these streets around are so narrow, you eliminated the need for the ox to turn. So basically they just would kind of go back and forth, or left to right, almost like in two axes. So he was remarkably inventive and sort of really laterally thinking about space, about tectonics, machines,
Amazing.
everything, materials even too, because nobody, I mean, to use like basic materials in such an innovative way, as Pat just mentioned, is completely unprecedented. This is, and it then became a kind of golden standard for construction forevermore.
I mean, the amazing thing is these two men together. Remember the three men we're talking about. We've got Masaccio in the painting. We'll show you later on a bit more of that. And these two men, they've got the Donatello doing the very, very first, eventually the first bronze figure from the book, and constantly now. That the next one.
Fun fact: the whole construction was so shrouded in secrecy that at one point I think that Florentine officials thought that Brunelleschi was like leaking official information about the construction, and he was actually jailed during the construction of the Duomo as well, which is extraordinary.
Now this is again, they're working together, and this particular one is the old sacristy of San Lorenzo, and it's a Basilica of San Lorenzo. Now the important thing here, and again, it's Brunelleschi doing the architecture and Donatello basically the decoration. Donatello did these two figures, these two circular thing in the terracotta, the crucifix in the front, again the figures here, and in this particular case the doors. So you've got a combination of the two here, and it's based on the life of St. John. And this the doors are the doors on the martyrs. They were done much later. They were done in 1637, and they belong to the old baptistry. Now, next one, we're going to see Donatello doing a first again, constantly doing first, and interestingly using different, because these are quite interesting. Now, this one is fascinating because when at the beginning I talked about this particularly dreadful pope. This particular he was called Senna. I think he's Balthazar Cossa, and he was John the 23rd, and he was the pope for whom the Medici were the bankers, and this is his tomb, and of course it's Donatello. But the one in this one, which I think is one of the most beautiful, and this particular one, this tabernacle, it's Mary, it's the Annunciation of the Virgin, and it shows you this fascination for all sorts of materials on the one thing. He used everything. He used terracotta. Sometimes he used real cloth, and in this particular case, it's grey stone and gold for this rather beautiful Annunciation. And this particular one again is 1433, and you see Mary is the angel Mary is kneeling to the angel, because of course she will become the mother of God, and it's decorated with gold, and this is what most extraordinary one. Okay, next one. He's constantly doing new things the whole time. This is the most important thing we're going to see, though. Now, here we've got the difference between Ghiberti and Donatello. Both of them are working in Siena. This is the altar piece in Siena. Now, this in Ghiberti, it's the baptism of Christ. Of course, it's bronze, but now look at Donatello's. Now, this is the very, very first time you see perspectival space in bronze. Now, look, it's a narrative. We're looking at, of course, the Feast of Herod. So we're seeing the head of John the Baptist being brought to Herod. Now, look all the way back, and here you see the figure of the servant. The figures here. Here we've got the musicians, and here we have the actual object. Now, this is what's so fascinating. He has created it so that we, the onlookers, have to actually move into this space intellectually when we're looking at it. Because look at the way that he plays with perspectival space. Look at the shape of the table, and then look at this from the back. It is quite remarkable. Look, here you've got.
It's literally eye level.
It's quite amazing.
It is eye level.
It's quite amazing. Yeah. Quite amazing.
Because here you can't see the surface here, but you can see the surface there. And then here you see the undersides of the arches.
And then you see the back here. You see the whole. You see the whole of the narrative coming round and coming round to the front to present the head. And look at the expressions of the watching people, the horror on the faces. It's quite remarkable. It's 1423, and it's the first time. And the difference between this and this is very important. Okay, next to this is the bit. Now this is in the exhibition. Now we are very fortunate because it's a Masaccio, and that, as I said, he died at the age of 27. And this particular one is Saint Jerome and John the Baptist. And of course, it is quite remarkable. Again, this was from Rome, actually, and it turned up, this actually comes from Berlin. Look at the heads of these people. And most especially, I love this lovely little lion, and St. Jerome and his lion, and here, of course, is John the Baptist, and with his cross and so on, and I say it's quite. They were both working. Both Masaccio and Donatello were working at Siena at the same time. Okay, next, it's a beautiful piece, and this is very interesting because you begin to see the humanism of Donatello with these two. This is again from the exhibition, and both of these are from Camilla's photographs. And this is a reliquary bust of San Donato, and it's 1330, and it's silver gilting. But this one is absolutely beautiful. When you see the thing, you're looking at look at the difference in the heads of these two. Look, you're looking at a real head. Here's another reliquary bust, this time it's Donatello, and this particular man is San Rosero, and he actually was a Roman. He was a saint at the time of Rome. He was a Roman soldier who converted to Christianity and was murdered and became therefore a saint. And AD 305 he was at the time. But this particular one is 1402, and it is quite amazing. It's cast bronze and it's gilded as well. So you've got this really extraordinary head. But the next one perhaps is the most astonishing. This is terracotta. It's the bust of a man. They're not sure who it is. It's 1455 to 60. Look at the humanism of this wonderful photograph that Camilla's taken, and we're looking directly up at this man's head. It is quite extraordinary. They think it may be a man called Niccolo di Uzzano, and he was a Florentine politician, but they're not really sure about who the head is at all. But it may have been made, they think, from a death mask. They're not sure, but it is so human. When you see it, you just can't believe it. Okay, Nick, do you really think you're looking at something? And these seriously wonderful Virgin and Child, they are quite remarkable. This is Donatello, and this, they say, possibly Donatello. Now again, that's meant to be seen from below. And can you see how you're looking up towards, look at the difference in the cloth and the child, and again, the size of the hand, and here. And these, of course, are terracotta. And designed to be placed on a high niche, so you're looking upwards towards these figures all the time. And the next one shows this now you're going to say this, Camilla. I've got no intention of trying to say it. But Skia,
it's Skia. I think it's Sciaccato.
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 Now, can you read this? Because this is terribly important. He literally invented this. It's a squash relief. They call it terribly shallow. Terribly shallow. And they again, he was inspired. You remember we looked at the ancient carvings, and as they say, you see, it's terribly small. Vasari described this as great skill in design and invention, and certainly he was the only person to be able to do it, because I want you to look at these figures carefully. Look at the angels, and look at this is one of the most beautiful. It's called the Madonna of the Clouds. And the Madonna is quite literally in the sky, surrounded by angels. And the baby, look at her feet. They're forward to us, and then she disappears. And these very tiny heads at the back, they are quite extraordinary. And this actually came from Boston. And it was probably made for private devotion. They don't really know where it originally came from, okay, with any certainty. But this one we've got, belongs to the V&A. This arrived at the V&A in 1861. And this is quite extraordinary. Sadly, we can't really see the detail. It's the Ascension of Christ giving the keys to St. Peter. Now, briefly, I'm going to just try and show you. There's Christ. Here's St. Peter. And the keys here. Here is the Virgin Mary here. And here are the disciples around here and here. But most importantly, we're looking backwards in space, and the trees are right in the background. There's his view of Jerusalem. So you've got all of this in the foreground, and then you've got the middle ground, and you've got the far background, and all of which are about, 2 inches, 2 or 3 inches, something like that. It is quite remarkable. It was 1428 to 30. But originally, this came from the Palazzo Medici. And we were very rich in the late 19th century, and all these very wealthy men who went to Florence from Italy bringing the stuff back. And in this case, we're lucky enough to have it at the V&A. It is quite remarkable. Okay, next one. Because here is somebody trying to do it and not really succeeding very well, doing the same thing. It's a sarcophagus of a female saint in this particular case, and they say it's the workshop of somebody called Grigore Alleghetto. And this is much later. This is 1476. That's about 40 years later. And you can see the difference in that. This is him trying to do this particular way of working. And it was probably commissioned from Santa Giustiano in Padua. And the next one we show the difference, 2 detailed differences. Here is the one we were looking at before, and we're looking now, the angels in the front, the trees, and right at the back, Jerusalem. This is Donatello, and this is the person who was copying this, doing the style. Extraordinary, quite extraordinary. And this is the one that I wept at. Look at that head. Look at the head of the Virgin and the Child. The 2 noses close together. And can you see again the difference in that tiny space? You've got this very interesting idea of her literally bursting out of her frame. She's in front of her frame. But look at this. And I've put on with it by now, this is Filippo Lippi, who also began to develop the idea of single-eye perspectival space. This is 1465, and this one is 1420. And it was originally, it's called the Patsy Madonna. Originally, it came from the Patsy, and it is quite extraordinary. Again, it came from originally it came from it was part of the Medici collection. It's a beautiful piece as well. Okay, next one. There's detail.
It's amazing.
Isn't it amazing? Look at the hands.
But the noses,
noses.
and this feels slightly
Oh.
more sort of
It
rounded
is, yes.
than
The babies. The babies. Isn't it extraordinary?
It's amazing.
We've put it with this other one simply to show you the difference, what was happening now. This is the Madonna of the humility, and this is 1390, it is on the right. And there you see the difference between now, the space now. Isn't it extra? And this one is not in the exhibition. He was working by this time with Michelozzo, did for about 10 years. And they were doing architectural things, working all over Italy, really. And this was the tomb of Cardinal Rinaldi of the Brancacci, the one we looked at before. And it's again the Assumption of the Virgin. Basically, again, it is just showing you that this is not in the exhibition, to show you the sort of the extraordinary, complicated carving of these. They're quite remarkable. Okay, next one. Again, it shows you the details. Now, this is the first time. This is this particular man. He died very young. He was a pupil on the right. He was a pupil of Donatello's. He was called Desiderio di Saturnino, and he was born in 1429. He was maybe younger. He died in 64, and he was the nearest. He got the nearest to Donatello. This particular one. This is again the Madonna. And it's the kind of idealized femininity of the period. And again, this again is probably Donatello. They're not absolutely certain. It's a terracotta. It's a probably. But basically, this particular man, Settignano, was the only one who nearly managed this. What's the word again?
Sciaccato.
Sciaccato. Okay, next one. The incredible, the thing is that the virtuosity of this man, of Donatello, is quite remarkable. I mean, he was used to doing things that nobody else was. This particular background here, it's gilding, and it's inset with wax, and it's under glass. And here you've got the combination of glass and terracotta. And these tondos are quite they were sort of personal, for private things. This particular one is about 1440, and it is in the exhibition. So this one you can see for yourself. But the next one, for me, was one of the most beautiful. I couldn't believe this one. Look at that! Look at that sculpture. It's the dead Christ with the angels. Look at the angels. Look at the face. Look at this. Of course, this particular way, you think of Bellini in terms of painting. This particular view of Christ with the angels became tremendously popular at this time. And this particular one came from the high altar at St. Anthony. But this Camilla took the photograph of to show us. You can see here in the blue, it was the places where Donatello lived and worked. In the red, places from which Donatello received commissions. So you see we've got it right down to Naples. And there's only one piece of Donatello sculpture in Venice at the top there, and that's in red too. But the other places he went to with Michelozzo and so on, it's terribly interesting. But look at the detail of this. The background, you see, they're holding the cloth that covers the dead body of Christ. The angels are holding the cross. It's quite beautiful. Okay, next one. And this is a strange one. This is a very young, again, this is done by both Donatello and Settignano, and it's the young John the Baptist, and he makes him look a bit like a waif, doesn't he? But of course it's John the Baptist because he's got this very typical cloth animal skins he's always shown with. This is in the exhibition, so this one can see. This is 1442. It's marble. Doesn't look marble, but it is marble. This particular one. I had to keep looking at it, checking it to make sure that it was. Now the next group are very, very sweet and very strange. Again, they come directly from the Romans. This particular figure here, this funny little bronze figure, is Roman. And it's called the Cupid, and it's about it's 142 BC. But here you've got Donatello using these. They think that these were actually made for the benefit of his associates and friends, those humanists, the writers who were part of the intellectual life of Rome, or one of whom actually was Cosimo Medici, and he calls them spiritelles, and they're meant to be spirits in a very, very funny way, and they're very sweet, and they're little tiny statuettes, and they're very, very effective. They're sort of about humanism. These, okay, he uses them a lot, and we see now everybody else using them. Okay, let's look at the next one. I think these are so sweet. They think they were candle holders, and these two little figures, they're holding the candles, and they're sort of, look at their little wings. The difference in the sculpture of the two of them, but perhaps the most impressive was the choir. The next choir one, which shows them all working. Look at this choir. This is 1433, and it's it's marble, enamel, glass, and this is in the Duomo, and ceramic and bronze. Look at the babies, look at children moving in and out of it. It is quite beautiful. That's of course not in the exhibition, but there is one part. There is one in the exhibition next, which is there, and this this was when he was working with Milazzo, and it's the dancing spirituality, and this is 1434, and this came from from San Stefano. And this is in the exhibition, so you can see that it was a pulpit. The interesting thing, it was they had all these extraordinary things. Next one shows you a basket by a follower, and this particular man was called Maso di Bartolomeo, and he worked with Donatello, and it's the basket to contain the holy girdle of the Virgin, of course. This is what it was. Isn't it sweet? Look at them coming round. You see the little going inside this thing. It's extraordinarily beautiful. They're the kind of winged babies, really.
The putti.
They are sweet, aren't they?
Putti.
They are so sweet. Now this, of course, it's not in the exhibition. But again, you'll see another first. The very, very first full-scale sculpture, bronze sculpture of since the Romans, and this is the equestrian statue. He's called Erasmo Giuliani, but it's Gattamelata, and it's 1449, 1433, and it's in Padua, of course. And the head is in the exhibition, and they called it after Donatello. It was because it was much later, and it's a portrait of Gattamelata from the model of The point about this particular place in Padua, it was under the auspices of at the time of Venice, and this particular man was a conduttore, which was a sort of a private soldier for the Venetians, really. And but the sculpture, the only one he had to go on really was the Roman one, which is in Rome, of course, and he must have seen this, and it's a statue of Marcus Aurelius in Rome, which he saw. Okay, next one. They're quite extraordinary. Now this is interesting, because here we see this extraordinary high altar in Padua. This particular exhibit is in the exhibition, which is why I put it on, and it is 1447. And it's St. Anthony of Padua. Now, the interesting thing, this loincloth, which looks as if it's waving almost in a thing, and it was a very important commission, this first important commission in Padua. And it shows you the detail, and here it is, the high altar. And now we're going to see the images from here. But this was done. He had a large studio. I mean, he didn't do everything himself. He had a large studio, a lot of people working for him. Okay, next one. By now he's very, but this is so interesting, because we're going back to our friend Masaccio. And this is the Holy Trinity with the Virgin and the donors, and it comes from Santa Maria Novella, and it was done 1425 to 1427. And I've done it deliberately, but I've found this images deliberately because it shows you the use of the very first use of single-eye perspective, and this is from it here. And this is, again, almost full-scale donors here. And you get this sense of space going back and up and looking upwards. And we're going to see the same thing of Donatello at exactly the same time. In a minute, this is what we're going to look at. And this is the high altar at the same St. Anthony, the one I showed you before. And it's the Miracle of the Mule, which of course is fried as completely daft. And it's a lovely idea that a starved mule was given the choice of food and the host, and he chose the host. And here's the mule busily choosing a host, and here quite nonsense. But the important thing is look at this perspectival space. Do you want to talk about this at all, Camilla? Look at the way that it goes back right into the distance.
It's quite a deep perspective,
isn't it?
Actually, so technically, yes. I think, again, just to kind of reinforce what the geometry of everything, you would literally be almost like with your chin on the floor, basically, because you see nothing of the floor. So it's almost like, I don't know, a cat perspective, cat eye perspective, right? Or a dog.
And the mess of it, that in one of the reviews I was reading, they were pointing out that it could be built, actually. It could be built now by...
Oh, well, yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of work.
I mean, proportionally,
exactly.
This depth here, obviously, is perhaps equal to this depth. So these are all squared spaces. You have that sort of altar at the back. And then all of these structures in the back it's almost like it hasn't yet been completed in construction.
Amazing.
Absolutely. But the barrel vaulting is all accurate.
It's extraordinary. No, but this is fascinating. This is the difference between the Romans, which is no doubt that he looked at, and the heads. For the first time, I said at the beginning, we're looking at secular work. It's the head of a bearded man. This is Donatello, and this is Roman. This is an ideal head, and this is a head of a human being. And you see the difference. It's quite remarkable. They know that this is 1455, and this is AD 101. They think it's the Emperor Hadrian's adopted son. They don't really know who it is. But look at the head, look at the hair. Look at the, as you said, the bags under the eyes, Camilla. It's extraordinary,
Yeah.
absolutely extraordinary.
It's less idealized.
It's almost amazing, absolutely amazing. Then the next one, you've taken the lovely slide of the side views of it. You see, here's the ideal head, and here's the head of the man. And we don't know who it was, it's just the head of a man. But it's 1455. The next one is again from the Medici Center. And this is always called the Medici crucifix. And again, look at the detail. Look at St. John here and the ladder to take Christ down from the cross. And look at the thieves on the side. And here again, the Virgin Mary. And this time again, this combination. Remember that he was trained as a goldsmith. You've got this combination of gold and bronze. Look at these figures. Look at the realism of these figures. And we're talking here again, 1453. And it's as if we're looking through a window. They're quite remarkable. And this use of perspective is extraordinary. This is in the exhibition. Okay, next one. It's an incredible exhibition, but this is fascinating. I talked to Angela about this because she went to I think it's actually in the Friary. It's the one piece from Venice, and it's wood. It's John the Baptist, and here is the complete altar, the full altar. I don't know who, I wasn't able to find out who did the other sculpture, but he did this John the Baptist. It's in wood, and it was, the altar they think was possibly for Florentines. It was a Florentine altar, but it's got the sort of the third scroll, and it says here, "Behold the Lamb of God." And perhaps they think it was the gift of the Medici to Florence, because to Vienna, to Venice. I'm saying it wrong. To Venice, because the Medici were exiled briefly from Florence, and the Venetians were very kind to him and his family, and they think that this may have been a sort of thank you from the Medici to Venice. They don't really know. Okay, but this one is extraordinary. This is quite a bit. It made the most tremendous fuss when it was seen. It's the Penitent Magdalene. Now, there's been absolutely nothing like it at the time. The nearest we could come to, I keep on saying, is German Expressionism. Look at the head of the Magdalene. Nobody was working like that at this time. This is what was normally felt to be the figure of the Magdalene as a master of the Magdalene, which was in Florence. But this one, the Penitent one, it's wood again. It's 1450, it's late. It's 1453 to 55. The John the Baptist is earlier. John the Baptist is 1438. But this one is late, very late. He dies in 66. Look at this figure. Isn't that extraordinary? As I said, German Expressionism, really. Quite remarkable. Okay, next one. This is in the exhibition. This is almost the last thing he was working on, this particular one. And this is Judith and Holofernes, of course. And he was still working on it, well, in 57. But I want you to look carefully, again, at the humanity of these figures. Look at the Virgin. And the difference in the way he uses bronze, the smoothness of Christ's legs by comparison to the quite rough quality of the cloth. But look at this figure here and this figure here. This one here, this is a lamentation over the dead Christ, of course, and the range of emotion is extraordinary. But the point about this one, again, it's freestanding, and again, it was these extraordinary pieces were made the first time. These big ones like this was made of bronze since the Romans. Okay, next one, and you'll see that what I'm talking. They were actually. This is the garden. The house of the Medici was built by Michelangelo, and they were working together. And they think that the Judith and Holofernes was inside. They're not quite sure whether the David was, but this particular image is from Pontormo, and this is Cosimo Medici. And this is about 1518. And they were friends. They were both buried, as it happens, in San Lorenzo. They died. He died 2 years before Donatello. But this is the interior garden of the Palazzo, and this is where certainly Judith and Holofernes was. But the next one is this very, very strange. This is so weird. This one. It's this very, very strange figure. Little figure of Attis Amarino. And it's a Spiritelli, but it's, look at the bottom, it's very funny. It's a strange combination. There's a sort of a tail, a cord with a poppy flower, a funny head between the wings. And they think, they don't know, but they think originally it was probably holding, they think that he was possibly holding a bronze something or other, because the one thing that is certain about all the work from Donatello, he used everything, he used all sorts of things. But I think it's really very funny, this one. And then the next one, of course, is the famous one. Now there's all sorts of discussions about this. This is, if anybody talks about Donatello, this is the only one they remember. And one of the very best things I heard on the television was this sculptor talking. He's actually an American sculptor living and working in Florence. And he was very interesting because at the moment, the last 20 or 30 years, there's been much discussion about whether this is a homosexual figure. And as he pointed out at the time that Donatello was working and Michelangelo and anybody else, they possibly were homosexual, but there was no sense of the artist taking his own interest into the object that he was commissioned for. They feel much more likely it was a Medici commission, and it stood, as far as the Medici were concerned, of Florence, the young Florence, actually triumphing over the strength of Rome, i.e.
The head of the lion would be
Rome, and this would be the young. The only criticism we've all got of, I was talking to Angela about it, about the exhibition, which is beautifully hung, is the fact that for some extraordinary reason, they've put their copy of this David in a niche, so you don't see the back.
It's actually pushed up against one, like a column.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Because you literally can't see the back, and this is frightfully important.
Well, yeah, Pat, one of the first things that Pat did point out that was that it's in the Bargello, correct?
Yes.
And it is in the round. You are able to walk around
all the way around it.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, you see, there's all sorts of interesting things. There's a piece of what looks to be like sort of
a feather
or something, wing, but it's obviously supporting this particular
but you can only see that if you walk around.
You can only see it when you look very, very careful. And the head of Goliath is really quite gentle. And again, I'm quoting the same sculptor, and he's talking about the hat. There's much giggles lately about the hat, but in fact, it's laurel leaves. And by all accounts, shepherds at the time did wear hats with laurel leaves, so this man says. and it's quite likely. Shall we have the next one?
Yeah.
This is, he never saw it, because this was his final big commission. And these were the two pulpits, which are now, of course, actually, they're absolutely extraordinary. They were brought to San Lorenzo literally 99 years after his death. And here is his tomb up here. And the first one is dedicated to Christ's Passion, and the second one is the Ascension. And look at these figures on here. And you see again, you see these extraordinary three-dimensional spaces, extraordinary things. They were never, as I say, he didn't finish them, and they weren't put into San Lorenzo until, as I say, 99 years after his death. And the final one that shows you this one, look from here. Isn't this extraordinary? And it's of course, it's Christ before Pilate. And you see again this wonderful sense of space. Well, there you are, my dears. That's it.